social. Let's talk first about Victory Day. It is a big day every year in Russia, but it's pared down this year, isn't it?
It is massively pared down. It is usually huge, both in Red Square in Moscow, but also across the country. But they've cancelled all of the parades outside the capital. Russia has lost a huge amount of military equipment, potentially up to two-thirds of its tanks. It's lost 50% of the territory it once owned, and therefore that probably explains why it's cancelling some of this. But also, one of the reasons is that this parade, which is the Immortals Regiment, it's members of Russia who've lost loved ones or relatives in the Second World War or that campaign, that carry a picture on parade. Last year, President Putin carried a picture of his father in uniform and led it. The trouble is, this year, the authorities are really concerned that loads of Ukrainian, that people who've lost their families in the war in Ukraine, and that will expose the true level of losses. And so Russia's been paranoid to try and cancel this element. It's also worth noting, actually, though, that Ukraine, although this war is about the millions they lost, Ukraine per capita lost more people in that war against Nazi Germany than Russia did. And as a result, Ukraine also has its own Victory Day, and that day is today. And part of the reason why we think we're seeing this uptick in activity is just to combat any Ukrainian celebrations. But the irony here is Russia said that it was invading Ukraine to denazify it, and yet both countries are celebrating Victory Day because they beat the Nazis.
OK, interesting. And we had that air alert across the whole of Ukraine this morning, and Russia have been active in recent days, haven't they?
They have. For the last 10 days, there's been a massive upswing in the number of attacks. We haven't been covering it the last couple of days because obviously the coronation. But for the last 24 hours, there were 35 136 drones, these drones that come from Iran that Russia bought and have been hitting targets. Now, Ukraine are getting very good at targeting those and knocking them out of the sky. But 16 missiles were also fired and 61 airstrikes across the country. And they were all across Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Odessa and in Kherson. In fact, you know, in Kyiv, the mayor there, Klitschko, said that 5 civilians were injured in one of the attacks. But when you see it, these don't look like military targets, do they? This is a civilian block of flats, and one of the floors has just been completely taken out of it. And likewise in Odessa, they targeted a food warehouse which was blazing away. Again, if you recall, the Russians were targeting energy infrastructure across the country. It looks like they've shifted to food, which is a very worrying development. But as you say, air raid across the whole country. So they're obviously, Ukraine's expecting more of the same today.
Let's talk about Bakhmut. I mentioned it in the intro to all of this. It would have been, if you're looking at it from Putin's point of view, would have been an ideal situation for him to win that and then celebrate Victory Day. But it's been very difficult, isn't it? And it just isn't turning into the big victory that he thought it would be.
No, and there's so 11 months we've been talking about this, probably over 100,000 casualties by some estimates, and it's become a bit of a meat grinder. Now, Russia does control about 90% of the city of Bakhmut now, and as you say, would have been provided a great Pyrrhic victory for Putin. But out to the southwest there, that sort of 8 o'clock position, the 504 is the resupply route. That is still able to be operated. And what the Russian army is doing at the moment is around the top and the bottom, they're trying to encircle, and the Wagner group are active in the middle of the city. But of course, there's been very highly publicised friction between the Russian army and the Wagner group about ammunition. That seems to be resolved now. But the irony here, and the really sad bit from a military perspective, is why Bakhmut? Ukraine has made that a stand, and when asked about it, they said, well, we've got to reduce the size of Russian forces. We'll kill them somewhere, and actually, if they're going to throw themselves at our guns at 7-to-1 casualty rates, we'll do it here. It turns out like this week, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the boss of the Wagner Group, has said that Russia is doing exactly the same thing. So you've got both sides, the tragedy of this war, both sides in a grinding war of attrition for a city that neither of them think matters too much, but both sides are just trying to maximise the number of casualties they inflict on each other. It's just part of the horrors of war. It's very difficult to rationalise the massive loss of human life and devastation for what purpose.